You can draw this in Procreate. You can create this landscape by following this step-by-step video tutorial. I will guide you through the entire process. You can create the landscape and the birds with just the brushes that are already in the Procreate app. And at the end, I'll be adding a little deer from my animal brush pack, but that's just optional. And once you're finished creating your landscape, be sure to share it on Instagram and tag me in the image. That way I will be able to find it and perhaps you'll see your artwork in the next You Can Draw This video. So, are you ready to get started? First of all, our canvas, it's 3000 by 2000 pixels. And I have created a color palette in case you want to use the exact same colors I'm using in this video. You can just download it for free through the link in the description. First thing we'll do is fill our canvas with a color. We'll pick this purplish color in our color palette and we'll just drag it onto our screen. Now let's just zoom out a little bit so we can see the edges of our canvas. And for our brush, we will go to the airbrushing brushes and use the soft brush. It is set to 40% opacity. And let's put the size at 14%. And now we are going to add some other colors to our background. Let's first start with the second color here. And let's make some horizontal strokes on our screen. And since the opacity is at 40%, our brush is a bit transparent, so we can slowly build up our colors. Now let's move to the next color. We'll use this yellow. And let's go from the top down to about here, making a gradient. And we'll make the top nice and bright. Let's even pick this color right here, the fourth color in the color palette. And we'll gradually make it lighter towards the top. And let's even pick this fifth color and make it even lighter here. And now you can see that the transition, it isn't entirely smooth, but we can fix that by going to the magic wand and then use Gaussian blur. Now you can slide with your pen or your finger on the screen, slide it to the right to blur your layer. And I'm going for around 24–25%. So we get a nice soft gradient. And I can just click the brush, for example, to get out of that Gaussian blur menu. Next, we'll make a layer for our grass. We'll go to the layer menu. So click the two squares, then click the plus to create a new layer. And now we'll go to the selection tool. You can find it under that S-shaped ribbon. Let's zoom out just a little bit. And we will make a selection for our grass. We'll set it to rectangle. And then we'll just drag just outside of your canvas. That's where you start, and then just drag it up like this until you are about at 1/3 of your canvas. So that's about here. And now you can fill it with a color. Let's pick this dark color right here. And you can just drag the circle onto your selection. And I want the top part to be a bit lighter, so we'll keep the selection active and use our soft brush, which we have already selected, and use that lighter color right here. And while the selection is active, we can only paint inside of the selection. So that's very handy. Let's make that top part a little bit lighter. Just make some horizontal strokes like this. And now that we have colored this, we can turn off the selection by just clicking the S-shaped ribbon again. Now I want to soften this all a little bit because I think that transition near the horizon, that's a bit too crisp. So let's go to the magic wand again. Use Gaussian blur. And again, we'll slide to the right, giving it a slight blur. Let's go for something around 5%. You don't want it to be too blurry. And you can just pick the brush again, for example, to get out of that menu. For our next step, I would like to add a sun to our sky. Let's go back to layer 1, that's our sky layer, and let's make a layer on top of it. So click the plus for a new layer. And for our brush, we will go to the calligraphy brushes and pick the monoline brush. And for the color for our sun, we'll use this very bright yellow color. Now just draw a circle. You can draw the circle and hold your pen in place. And when you hold one finger on your screen, it will snap to a perfect looking circle. And you can use edit shape to move it around a bit. And I want it to be in the center. So I'm guessing that's about here. And using the color drop technique, you can fill your circle. Now this sun also has quite some crisp edges, and we don't want that. We want it to look a little bit blurry. And we'll do that by duplicating this layer. You can do that by sliding to the left and click duplicate. Now we'll go to the bottom layer and we'll use a Gaussian blur on this. So we'll go to the magic wand again, use Gaussian blur and slide to the right. Let's take it to about 12%. And get out of the menu by just clicking on something else. I want to create a misty atmosphere here in this image. So I want to paint on top of that sun a little bit. And we'll do that on a separate layer again. So first click that top sun layer and then click the plus for a new layer. And we'll go back to the airbrush. Right here, the soft brush. And for the color, let's pick this yellow color. That's the third color in the color palette. And I'll make the brush a little bit smaller. Let's say 5%. And let's go over that underside of the sun a little bit. Making these diagonal strokes. Just covering that lower part of the sun. We don't want those edges to look too hard. So let's use, again, a Gaussian blur. So go to the magic wand, use Gaussian blur, and slide to the right. Let's go for, well, let's say around 10 or 11%. You can play around with that. And just click the brush to get out of that menu. Now let's add some trees and bushes to the horizon in our painting. We'll do that on a layer below that, well, ground layer. So we will need to be below layer 2, and we are already in a great place to do that. So let's just click the plus for a new layer. And for our brush, we will go to the organic brushes and we will use cotton. That's this brush right here. And for the color, we will use this color right here, the fourth color in the color palette. The brush is set to 100% opacity and the size is at 4%. And now let's just add some trees to our horizon. You can vary the size a bit, make some a little bit bigger. Also vary the pressure that you use with your pen. If you use little pressure, it'll be a bit more transparent, and if you use a lot of pressure, it'll be more opaque. So just a little bit of bush on the horizon. Just make some various shapes. Some will be a bit higher and be a bit more opaque. And some will be smaller, perhaps a bit more transparent. You don't have to give it too much thought. Maybe a higher one over here. There we have a more interesting looking horizon right now. Next I want to add some mist. And let's do that on a separate layer on top of our bush layer and the ground layer. So let's click the plus right here and go back to the soft brush under airbrushing. For the color, we'll pick this light color right here, the third color. And now let's go over that horizon to add a little bit of mist. And if you like, you can just rotate your canvas if that's easier to make straight strokes like that. For me it is. And let's just go over that horizon, adding that mist. I'm using very little pressure on my pen, making these quite transparent strokes. Adding that layer of mist to that background. I think this looks nice and misty. The next step is to add some grass. Again, we will be using a separate layer. Now, if you're starting to get into trouble making that many layers, then you can just merge the layers that you are happy with. So click the plus for a new layer if it's possible for you. And for the brush, we will go to the organic brushes again, but this time we will use sword grass. I have the opacity of the brush set to 75% and the size is at 10%. For the color, let's go and use this color right here, the fourth color in the color palette again. And let's start just below that horizon, about here, and just create a layer of grass. I'm not using too much pressure on my brush, because if I use more pressure, the grass will become bigger. Let me just fill this underside. So go for something like this. And now we will lower the opacity of this layer. Click the N on the layer and slide your opacity slider to the left. And let's go for somewhere around 30, 34. I'll go for 32%. And we'll make a new layer again to make another layer of grass. And let's make that one a bit lower. And if you are afraid of merging your layers, then of course you can always just duplicate your entire canvas, your entire file, so that you'll have one file with the layers still intact and one file where you have merged them. So in case anything goes wrong, you will still have your layers in the other file. Now again, let's lower the opacity of this layer. So click the N and turn the slider to the left. And now I'll go for around 45%, 46. And I'll click the plus for another layer. I'll go a bit lower this time, making some more grass. And I'm varying the pressure on my pen to make some bigger grass and some smaller. Now let's just do it one more time. Lower the opacity to around 67, I'm sorry. And let's click the plus for a final layer of grass. And again, we'll go a little bit lower. And add some final grass. To make the grass look a bit more interesting, we will also be painting some details in by hand. I will do that on a separate layer, but first let me just merge these grass layers that we just created. These 4 grass layers, I'll just pinch them together to put them on a single layer. Now I'll click the plus for a new layer, and let's go to the drawing brushes. and use the little pine brush. And let's pick a color. We'll use this dark greenish bluish color. And the opacity of the brush is set to 100% and the size is at 48%. And now let's just add some grass by hand. You can zoom in a little bit and in some random spots, just make these little grass, these little reeds coming out. You can add some leaves. Make it a bit playful. And I'm focusing on the foreground here. I'm not placing any grass near the horizon, just here in the front. With some various shapes. And just making these little dabs to create, well, some leafy effect. And we'll move to the right, add some more here as well. And if you want some inspiration for plants and how they look, you can always grab some reference images and look at different types of plants in fields to get some ideas. Now it's already starting to look more interesting here with these little grasses popping up. Let's also pick another color. Let's use this purplish color to add even more interest. I'm gonna make some flowery shapes just by making some dabs. Giving the suggestion of these flowers in the field. And finally, let's also use this very light color, that third color in the color palette, for just some tiny little dabs, as if there are light little flowers in this field. There, now let's move to the sky and add some birds to our sky. We're gonna fill it up. Let's make a new layer for that. And for our color, we will use this very dark, almost black color. And for our brush, we will use a brush that's under inking. We will be using the mercury brush. Let's zoom in a little bit. And the size, well, the opacity of the brush is 100% and the size is at 2%, almost 1. And let's start drawing some simple bird shapes. So just a little bit like the way you did when you were a kid. Well, at least that's the way I used to draw birds. With these very simple shapes. But if you look at photographs of big flocks of birds, you will see that it's actually what they look like if you look at them from a distance. We don't have to draw every individual bird with lots of detail. We can get away with these simple shapes. And our viewer will believe that these are all real birds. So let's just make a couple of them, filling this area of the sky. Making some a little bit smaller, just some triangular shapes, some a little bit bigger. Try to vary them a little bit. And once you have a decent amount of birds, a bit like this, we can just start duplicating these birds. So we don't have to draw all the birds by hand. Now there are two ways to duplicate these birds. You can either use the 3-finger gesture by sliding down with 3 fingers and using copy and paste. Or you can go to the layer menu and slide to the left on your layer and use duplicate. And then you can use the move tool, that's that little arrow, to move these birds around. And you can use this green little handle to turn them a little bit. Like that. And now we also have birds over there. Now let's duplicate them a couple of times to fill our sky. Just make sure to vary the angle a little bit. Now we already have quite a lot of birds. Let's merge these layers that we just created. So those are 4 layers. Let's merge them. And now we can duplicate this entire group by using copy and paste. We have this entire group of birds. Let's make this one a little bit smaller. You can drop it up there. And then duplicate that original layer again. Be sure to do that and not the layer that we just created since it is cut at the top. So we'll go to layer 10 again, slide to the left, use duplicate, and then go to the arrow to be able to move it around. Let's place some birds up there. And let's duplicate it again. So we'll go back to that original layer, use duplicate, and move it around. If you are getting confused by the layers and you're not sure what is on which layer, what I usually do is just turn a layer on and off to see what's on it. I want to go back to that original layer, so well, that's that one, and I'll duplicate it again to also fill this area. I feel like this top part, it's becoming a bit crowded, and that layer that we just created is causing that a bit. So let's use the selection tool, that S-shaped ribbon, go to freehand, and just select that top part with birds. Be sure that you're on the right layer. And now you can use the 3-finger swipe. Just swipe with 3 fingers to erase a part of that layer. Now we have quite a lot of birds in our sky. Let's just merge all these birds together. And now you can just draw in some extra birds by hand in places where you feel like, well, it can use a bit more birds. You can just go in there and draw some more until there are so many birds that it's becoming a bit scary. As a little extra, I would like to add a deer in our image. This is totally optional. You can leave it like this, or you can draw a deer by hand, of course, but I'll be using one of my animal brushes. If you want to use it too, you can find a link with a discount in the description. Let me go to my animal brush pack. I'll be using a brush from the Animal Brush Pack Volume 1, and that's this doe brush. Now for the color, we will use this very dark color. That's the 5th color in the color palette. And let's drop this deer in on a separate layer. I want it to be in front of the mist, but behind the grass layer. And the grass layer is, let me check, that's this layer. So we want it to be below that layer. Here we have the mist layer. So let's select that one first and then click the plus for a new layer. And here we can drop in the doe. Now I want it about here, but you can just use the move tool, that's the arrow, to move the deer around. I think this is a nice spot. It is standing out a bit much right now because you can totally see its legs, and we don't want that. We want it to merge with, well, with the environment. So what we'll do is use alpha lock on this layer, click the layer, and then select alpha lock. And now we will only be able to paint on this deer. And whatever we paint, it won't go outside of this shape. Now let's go to the airbrushing brushes and use the soft brush again. The size is at 5%, but maybe we can go a bit smaller. Let's go for a small 4%. And let's just pick this local color right here and go over those legs until they are nicely merging with the background. Go a bit lighter. And we're adding kind of a mist around that deer, making these horizontal strokes on top of it. To merge the legs even more, we can use a layer mask on this layer. Let's just click the layer and click mask. Now on this mask, we can paint with black, and whatever becomes black, it'll disappear. It'll be masked. So let's pick a black. You can double tap at the bottom of the circle to grab a 100% black. Let's zoom in a little bit. Make the brush even smaller. Let's go for 2%. And let's go over that underside, making that underside of the legs almost disappear, as if this doe is really standing in the grass. And now we have very easily added an extra touch to our landscape. And let's call it finished. I hope you have enjoyed following this landscape tutorial. If you did, then you might want to check out my other You Can Draw This videos as well. Or once you're finished watching all of those, then you might want to check out my Patreon page. Have fun, see you next time!